The first signal came on a Tuesday morning, buried beneath layers of cosmic background radiation that Earth's radio telescopes had been monitoring for decades. Dr. Sarah Chen was 3 cups of coffee deep into her shift at the Arecibo successor facility when the patterns began emerging from the static. Unlike the random pulses of distant quasars or the rhythmic spinning of neutron stars, this signal carried mathematical precision that made her hands shake as she reached for the emergency contact list. Within hours, the world's most powerful governments knew what Sarah had discovered. The signal wasn't just artificial, it was a greeting. Prime numbers arranged in sequences that spelled out basic physics concepts, followed by what could only be described as an invitation. The mathematics were elegant, almost childishly simple, as if designed for a species that had barely crawled out of its technological infancy. The message repeated every 12 hours, broadcast from a point in space roughly 4 light-years away. As Earth's best cryptographers and linguists worked to decode the fuller meaning, a disturbing pattern emerged. The aliens weren't just saying hello, they were offering help. The signal contained blueprints for clean energy, medical technologies that could eliminate cancer, and agricultural methods that could end world hunger. But something felt wrong to the military analysts who studied the transmission. The technology was advanced, yes, but not impossibly so. It was exactly the kind of help a more developed civilization might offer to a struggling younger species. The tone was paternal, almost condescending, like an adult offering candy to a child who had scraped their knee. General Marcus Rodriguez of the United Earth Defense Initiative was the first to voice what many were thinking during the emergency session at the United Nations. "They think we're primitive," he said, his weathered face grim as he studied the decoded portions of the message. "This isn't first contact between equals. This is charity." The aliens called themselves the Galactic Cooperative, and their follow-up messages painted a picture of a vast interstellar community dedicated to peace, prosperity, and the uplifting of younger species. They described their own worlds as paradise planets with carefully controlled climates, where conflict had been eliminated through perfect resource distribution and genetic optimization for cooperation. They spoke of hundreds of species living in harmony, each contributing their unique gifts to the greater whole. The warlike races had been gently guided away from aggression through careful social engineering. The resource-hungry species had been taught sustainable practices. The technologically advanced had learned to share their knowledge freely. Earth, they explained, was what they called a distressed world, a planet where an emerging species was struggling with primitive concepts like nationalism, resource competition, and territorial disputes. "But don't worry," their messages seemed to say, "we've seen this before. We know how to fix you." The reaction across Earth was immediate and divided. Half the world celebrated the dawn of a new age, imagining the end of disease, poverty, and war. Peace activists held rallies demanding immediate acceptance of alien aid. Scientists salivated over the advanced technologies being offered. Politicians saw opportunities for unprecedented cooperation between nations. But the other half of humanity had a different reaction entirely. In military bases around the world, career soldiers who had spent their lives studying warfare looked at the alien messages with growing unease. The Galactic Cooperative spoke of eliminating conflict as if it were a disease to be cured, rather than a fundamental aspect of growth and adaptation. They described their member species in terms that sounded disturbingly like domestication. Dr. Amanda Foster, an evolutionary biologist at Cambridge, was among the first to voice concerns that would soon spread through the scientific community. "They're talking about Earth like we're a rehabilitation case," and she wrote in a paper that would become legendary. "But what if our problems are actually our strengths?" She pointed out that every species the aliens described sounded remarkably similar in temperament: peaceful, cooperative, content with their assigned roles. There were no mentions of competitive innovation, revolutionary thinking, or the kind of chaotic creativity that had driven human advancement for millennia. As more detailed communications arrived from space, a clearer picture began to emerge. The Galactic Cooperative wasn't just offering help, they were offering membership. In a galactic civilization that had achieved peace through the careful management of aggressive tendencies and competitive instincts, the aliens seemed genuinely puzzled by humanity's mixed reaction to their generous offer. Their latest transmission included what appeared to be testimonials from other uplifted species. describing how much happier and more fulfilled they had become after joining the cooperative. The testimonials all had a strange uniform quality to them, like speeches given by people who had forgotten how to disagree. In the deep bunkers where Earth's military leadership gathered for emergency sessions, a different kind of mathematics was being calculated. Admiral Sarah Kim of the Pacific Fleet spread star charts across the table as she addressed her colleagues. "Look at their expansion pattern," she said, tracing routes between star systems. "Every species they've helped is now fully integrated into their collective. And notice what they all have in common now. They're all exactly the same kind of peaceful, cooperative, non-threatening society." The question hanging in the air was one that would define humanity's response to first contact. Was the Galactic Cooperative offering salvation, or was this the most sophisticated conquest in galactic history? And more importantly, what were they planning to do if humanity said no? As Earth's leaders prepared their response to the aliens' offer of help, military installations around the world quietly began implementing new protocols, just in case the galaxy's helping hand turned out to be something else entirely. The Galactic Cooperative's patience began wearing thin after Earth's sixth request for additional time to consider their generous offer. Their communications, once warm and understanding, now carried undertones of confusion and mild irritation. How could a species be so primitive as to hesitate when offered the solutions to all their problems? Ambassador Kethvar of the Cooperative's Integration Council transmitted what they clearly considered a final, gentle ultimatum. The message arrived with more sophisticated translation protocols, allowing for nuanced emotional content that previous communications had lacked. For the first time, humanity could sense the aliens' growing frustration. "Young species of Earth," the message began, "we have observed your hesitation with concern. We understand that primitive societies often struggle with change, even beneficial change. However, our offer of assistance comes with temporal limitations. The resources allocated for your uplift program cannot remain indefinitely suspended while you debate our proven methodologies." The translation software rendered emotional undertones that sent chills through the UN's xenolinguistics team. Beneath the diplomatic language was something that sounded remarkably like the patience of a parent finally losing temper with a stubborn child. Dr. James Wright, head of the xenopsychology department at Harvard, was among the first to notice the subtle shift in alien communications. "They're not talking to us like equals anymore," he observed during an emergency briefing to world leaders. "The language patterns suggest they've categorized us as defiant juveniles rather than sovereign decision-makers." The aliens proceeded to provide what they called educational materials about their previous integration successes. The data painted a picture of galactic civilization that was both impressive and deeply unsettling. Species after species had been guided from their primitive competitive phases into what the cooperative termed sustainable harmony. The Zephyrians had once been a warlike race that solved disputes through ritual combat. Now they were described as productive agricultural specialists who have channeled their former aggression into efficient food production. The stellar nomads had been spacefaring traders who competed fiercely for the best routes and resources. They were now cooperative logistics coordinators who ensure optimal resource distribution. Each success story followed the same pattern, a species with distinct cultural traits that were gradually smoothed away until they became productive, peaceful, and utterly uniform members of the galactic community. The testimonials all shared the same tone of grateful contentment, as if the speakers had forgotten they had ever wanted anything else. Captain Elena Vasquez of Earth's newly formed Stellar Defense Corps studied the alien data with the eye of someone who had spent 20 years analyzing enemy intelligence. What she found hidden in the cultural transformation records made her blood run cold. "These aren't integration success stories," she reported to her superiors. "These are assimilation protocols." The evidence was subtle but damning. Brain scan data included in the educational materials showed remarkable similarities across all cooperative species, regardless of their evolutionary origins. Psychological profiles revealed identical ranges of acceptable behavior, thought patterns, and emotional responses. Most telling of all, there were no records of any species ever leaving the cooperative once they had joined. When Earth's leaders requested clarification about these concerning patterns, the aliens' response revealed the first crack in their diplomatic facade. The Cooperative's Integration Council seemed genuinely bewildered by humanity's questions. Why would anyone want to leave a perfect society? Why would diversity of thought be preferable to efficient consensus? Why would any rational species choose struggle over guaranteed peace and prosperity? Your concerns reflect the confused thinking typical of unguided development, Ambassador Keithvar responded. These primitive attachments to concepts like independence and cultural uniqueness are exactly the kind of harmful delusions our integration process is designed to eliminate. You speak of these limitations as if they were virtues. The message continued with what the aliens clearly considered reassuring explanations. The integration process was completely painless, they explained. Most species barely noticed the gradual adjustments to their neurochemistry and social structures. Within a few generations, the former problems that had seemed so important simply faded away as better. More cooperative instincts took their place. It was then that humanity realized the true scope of what they were facing. The Galactic Cooperative wasn't just a confederation of peaceful species. It was a galactic empire that had perfected the art of conquest through kindness. They didn't destroy other cultures. They absorbed them so thoroughly that the conquered species thanked them for the privilege. The revelation sent shockwaves through Earth's scientific and military communities. In laboratories around the world, researchers who had been eagerly studying the aliens' offered technologies began finding disturbing patterns. The medical advances included subtle neurochemical modifications. The agricultural techniques required genetic modifications to both crops and the workers who tended them. The energy technologies came with social organization requirements that would fundamentally alter human governance structures. Every gift the aliens offered came with invisible chains attached. Dr. Maria Santos, a biochemist at the CDC, made the most chilling discovery of all when she analyzed the molecular structure of the suggested medical treatments. "These aren't just cures," she announced to the Emergency Medical Advisory Board. "They're designed to alter human brain chemistry at the most fundamental level. The anti-aggression compounds don't just reduce violence. They eliminate the neurological basis for competitive thinking, risk-taking, and what we might call troublemaking personality traits." As word of these discoveries spread through Earth's leadership, a grim consensus began to emerge. The Galactic Cooperative's offer of help wasn't just conquest. It was species-wide lobotomy disguised as medical care. The aliens, meanwhile, seemed to interpret humanity's continued research and delay tactics as confirmation of their primitive nature. Their latest communications carried a new tone, entirely, the firm patience of beings who had decided that humanity simply couldn't be trusted to make rational decisions about their own welfare. "We had hoped your species would demonstrate the wisdom to accept guidance voluntarily," the latest message read. "However, your continued resistance to beneficial change indicates that more direct intervention may be necessary for your own protection and the stability of this galactic region." For the first time since first contact, the aliens had stopped asking permission. The first galactic cooperative ships appeared at the edge of Earth's solar system on a Wednesday morning. Detected by deep space monitoring stations that had been hastily repurposed from astronomical research to early warning systems. The vessels were enormous, each one larger than Manhattan, and moved with the leisurely confidence of beings who had never encountered serious resistance. Admiral Chen of the combined Earth fleet watched the sensor readings with the grim satisfaction of someone whose worst fears were being confirmed. 12 ships, he reported to the emergency command center buried beneath the Rocky Mountains. "They're not even trying to hide. They want us to see them coming." The alien fleet settled into a standard orbital formation around Earth, positioning themselves with mathematical precision that spoke of countless previous operations. Each ship took a position that would allow them to cover a specific portion of the planet's surface, their arrangement optimized for what military analysts grimly recognized as occupation protocols. The Cooperative's final communication to Earth carried none of the diplomatic niceties that had characterized their earlier messages. Ambassador Keithvar's transmission was brief, efficient, and delivered with the tone of someone reading from a standard operating manual. "Species of Earth, your evaluation period has concluded. Analysis of your responses indicates severe developmental disorders requiring immediate intervention. Cooperative Integration Protocol 7 is now in effect. Please prepare your population centers for peaceful transition to guided development. Resistance will be interpreted as a symptom of the aggressive pathologies we are here to cure. What the aliens didn't understand, what their perfectly managed database of previous integrations had failed to prepare them for, was that Earth was different from the garden worlds they had conquered before. Every previous species they had encountered had evolved on planets with stable climates, abundant resources, and relatively few existential threats. Earth, as humanity was about to demonstrate, was what xenobiologists would later classify as a Class 12 death world. The differences became apparent during the cooperative's first attempted landing. 3 massive shuttles descended toward what their intelligence had identified as a major population center, Tokyo. The ships were designed for the standard integration protocol: land in the middle of the largest city, deploy benevolent-looking android representatives, and begin the process of explaining to the grateful natives how much better their lives were about to become. The shuttles never made it to the ground. Colonel Yuki Tanaka of the Japanese Self-Defense Force had spent the last 3 months studying every scrap of data about alien technology, looking for weaknesses. What she had discovered was that species from stable, peaceful worlds had never needed to develop the kind of paranoid, adaptive thinking that came naturally to survivors of a death world. The aliens had never fought an enemy that would rig an entire city with improvised explosives, then evacuate the population and wait for invaders to land in what appeared to be a target-rich environment. They had never encountered beings crazy enough to turn civilian infrastructure into weapons, or to sacrifice strategic locations for tactical advantage. As the alien shuttles descended toward central Tokyo, Tanaka triggered the most spectacular trap in military history. Months of careful preparation turned the city's gas lines, subway tunnels, and underground infrastructure into the components of a massive explosive device that turned 6 square blocks of urban landscape into a crater visible from space. The 3 shuttles simply vanished in the fireball, along with their crews and the precious cargo of integration equipment they had carried. The cooperative's response was immediate and revealed the first crack in their perfect confidence. Their remaining ships began bombardment of what they clearly considered military targets, but their targeting was based on data from garden world species that kept their weapons in obvious, dedicated facilities. Earth's military had learned differently. When your planet regularly tried to kill you with hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and ice ages, you learned to hide everything important, and to make every piece of infrastructure serve multiple purposes. The aliens spent hours methodically destroying empty bases and abandoned weapons factories, while Earth's real military assets, hidden in underground bunkers, disguised as civilian facilities, and distributed across thousands of mobile platforms, remained untouched and ready to strike back. Major Sarah Kim of the U.S. Space Force had been given what everyone assumed was a suicide mission: take a retrofitted space shuttle filled with nuclear weapons and get close enough to one of the alien ships to detonate it. What the mission planners hadn't counted on was Kim's background as a test pilot, someone who had survived years of flying experimental aircraft that killed most of the people who tried to operate them. She approached the massive cooperative vessel not as a warrior approaching a battle, but as someone who had spent her career dealing with machines that were actively trying to kill her. The alien ship's defenses were sophisticated and powerful, designed to stop anything that approached them with hostile intent. Kim's shuttle, however, wasn't approaching with hostile intent. According to its transponder signals and flight path, it was a damaged civilian vessel limping toward the alien ship in apparent surrender, broadcasting distress calls and requests for assistance. The cooperative's response protocols, designed for dealing with peaceful species, required them to render aid to any vessel in distress. Their defensive systems automatically stood down as the shuttle approached, their crews preparing to welcome another group of humans ready to accept integration. Kim waited until she was inside the alien ship's defensive perimeter before detonating the 30 nuclear warheads packed into her shuttle's cargo bay. The explosion lit up Earth's night sky like a second sun and left a debris field where the kilometer-long alien ship had been moments before. The remaining cooperative vessels immediately changed their tactics, pulling back to safer orbital distances and beginning what their commanders clearly considered a necessary escalation. If the humans were too primitive to accept voluntary integration, then they would be forced to accept involuntary Pacification. The orbital bombardment that followed was precisely calibrated to destroy Earth's major cities while leaving the infrastructure needed for a functioning agricultural society. The aliens had done this before with species that required more forceful persuasion. Within days, they expected to be receiving surrender transmissions from the survivors begging for protection and aid. What they received instead was the beginning of the most vicious guerrilla campaign in galactic history, conducted by a species that had learned warfare on a planet that considered lava, acid rain, and continent-sized storms to be normal weather patterns. Every bomb crater became a fortress. Every ruined city became a maze of sniper positions and booby traps. Every forest became a hiding place for mobile missile launchers operated by people who had grown up hunting animals that could kill them with a single mistake. The cooperative had never fought an enemy that treated a 70% casualty rate as an acceptable cost of doing business, or that considered the destruction of their own cities to be a minor tactical inconvenience rather than a catastrophic defeat. As reports from Earth reached the Galactic Cooperative's Central Command, confusion began to spread through their perfect bureaucracy. This wasn't how integration was supposed to work. 6 months after the first orbital bombardment, the Galactic Cooperative found itself dealing with a problem that none of their integration protocols had prepared them for. A species that was getting stronger the more pressure they applied. High Counselor Zethmar of the Integration Authority reviewed the latest reports from Earth with growing bewilderment. Standard doctrine dictated that after 6 months of systematic pressure, the target species should be begging for terms. Infrastructure destruction typically led to social collapse, which created the desperate conditions necessary for populations to welcome cooperative intervention. Instead, the humans had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had adapted. The orbital bombardment had destroyed most of Earth's major cities, but rather than creating chaos, it had triggered a coordinated response that suggested these beings had actually planned for this scenario. Within weeks of the initial attacks, new command structures had emerged from underground bunkers. Mobile governments were operating from hidden locations, and the surviving population had reorganized itself into the most efficient war machine the galaxy had ever encountered. Commander Torvan, leader of the Earth Integration Task Force, filed reports that read like dispatches from a nightmare. His forces had expected to find scattered groups of survivors fighting over scraps. Instead, they encountered an enemy that had turned the ruins of their civilization into an elaborate killing ground. The humans had weaponized everything. Destroyed buildings became sniper nests connected by tunnel systems that allowed defenders to appear and disappear like ghosts. Rubble was shaped into funnel zones that channeled cooperative ground forces into carefully prepared kill zones. Even the weather seemed to work against the aliens, as if the humans had learned to predict and exploit every aspect of their hostile environment. Captain Elena Rodriguez had been a Special Forces operative before the invasion. Now she led a mixed unit of former soldiers, engineers, teachers, and farmers in hit-and-run attacks against alien supply convoys. Her latest success involved the complete destruction of a cooperative logistics depot, using nothing but fertilizer, diesel fuel, and timing devices made from children's toys. "The thing they don't understand," she explained to her unit while preparing for their next raid, "is that we've been fighting this planet our entire evolutionary history. Everything here is trying to kill us, the weather, the animals, the bacteria, the geology. We learned to fight and adapt because anything that couldn't do both went extinct." Her words proved prophetic during the Battle of the Canadian Rockies, where a single human battalion held off an entire cooperative division for 3 weeks using nothing but knowledge of local terrain and an intimate understanding of how to survive in conditions that would kill most galactic species within hours. The human defenders led the aliens into a mountain valley during what appeared to be a strategic withdrawal. The cooperative forces, confident in their superior numbers and firepower, followed eagerly, expecting to finally corner and destroy a significant human force. The humans had indeed prepared a trap, but not the kind the aliens expected. Using controlled avalanches, pre-positioned explosives, and their knowledge of local weather patterns, they turned the valley into a natural disaster that buried the entire alien force under millions of tons of snow and rock. When rescue teams finally reached the site weeks later, They found that the few surviving aliens had been systematically picked off by human snipers who operated comfortably in sub-zero temperatures that left the galactic soldiers helpless and immobilized. The psychological impact of these defeats began affecting cooperative morale across multiple star systems. These were soldiers from species that had evolved on garden worlds where the most dangerous predator might be a herbivore with an attitude problem. They had never faced an enemy that had evolved alongside saber-toothed tigers, giant bears, and venomous snakes. Dr. Amanda Foster, the evolutionary biologist who had first warned about the aliens' true intentions, had survived the initial bombardment and now operated a mobile research station from hidden locations across the American Southwest. Her latest findings, broadcast on hidden frequencies to resistance cells worldwide, explained why humanity was winning a war they should have lost. Every other species they've conquered evolved in ecological niches that rewarded cooperation and peaceful resource sharing, she explained. During one of her underground broadcasts, we evolved in conditions that required individual initiative, rapid adaptation, and the kind of aggressive problem-solving that they consider a mental disorder. Her research had revealed something that the cooperative's xenobiologists were only beginning to understand. Earth's variable climate and diverse threats had selected for traits that made humans uniquely suited for asymmetric warfare. Humanity's so-called primitive aggression was actually a sophisticated survival strategy that allowed rapid adaptation to changing threats. The aliens had made the mistake of thinking that their peaceful nature made them morally superior. What they failed to understand was that their peace came from living on worlds so safe and abundant that their species had never needed to develop the kind of flexible, creative thinking that came from constant existential pressure. Meanwhile, reports began filtering back to cooperative command of something even more disturbing than human military effectiveness. Human innovation was accelerating under pressure. The destruction of their industrial base, rather than crippling them, had forced humans to become more creative and efficient. Jury-rigged weapons built from scavenged alien technology were proving more effective than standard cooperative equipment. Human engineers working in hidden workshops with minimal resources were developing countermeasures to advanced alien systems faster than the aliens could adapt their tactics. Master Sergeant David Chen exemplified this trend when he led a team that captured an intact alien transport ship using nothing but electromagnets salvaged from subway trains and copper wire stripped from destroyed buildings. The operation succeeded because the humans understood something the aliens didn't: that sophisticated technology was often vulnerable to simple, unexpected attacks. Chen's team used the captured ship not for transportation, but as a source of reverse-engineered technology that they immediately began incorporating into human weapons systems. Within weeks, human resistance fighters were using hybrid weapons that combined alien energy systems with human engineering, creating combinations that proved devastatingly effective against forces that had never faced their own technology, turned against them. The most troubling reports reaching cooperative leadership concerned what their analysts termed accelerated cultural evolution. Rather than breaking down under pressure, human society was becoming more organized, more efficient, and more dangerous. The destruction of traditional infrastructure had forced the development of new social structures optimized for survival and warfare. Children who had lost their schools were being educated in hidden bunkers by teachers who combined traditional subjects with military training and technical education. Young humans were emerging from this process with skill sets that made them more dangerous than most galactic species' professional soldiers. As the first year of the integration campaign drew to a close, High Counselor Zethmar faced an unprecedented situation in cooperative history. A species that was not only resisting integration, but was actually becoming stronger as a result of the pressure being applied. For the first time since the formation of the Galactic Cooperative, their perfect system of peaceful conquest was failing, and the implications of that failure would soon reach far beyond the small blue world that had started it all. The turning point came 18 months after the invasion began, when humanity did something that had never occurred in the cooperative's 1,000-year history of galactic integration. They took the fight to space. Captain Sarah Kim had survived her first suicide mission against the alien fleet, ejecting from her nuclear-armed shuttle at the last possible moment and spending 3 weeks in a survival pod before being rescued by a mining ship that had been converted into a makeshift warship. Rather than being grateful for her survival, she was furious that Earth only had one shot at orbital combat. Working with a team of NASA engineers, defense contractors, and what she diplomatically termed enthusiastic civilians with useful skills, Kim began developing what would become known as the Terran Space Irregulars. If the aliens thought controlling orbital space gave them an insurmountable advantage, they were about to learn how wrong they could be. The first human counterattack in space looked like nothing any military academy would recognize as proper tactics. A converted cargo freighter, loaded with nuclear weapons and piloted by a crew that included a former astronaut, 2 airline pilots and a demolitions expert who had learned her trade in coal mining, approached the cooperative's orbital blockade broadcasting a fake distress signal. The aliens, still following protocols designed for dealing with rational, peaceful species, allowed the apparently damaged ship to approach their formation. The freighter's crew waited until they were surrounded by enemy vessels before detonating their cargo, taking out 3 alien ships in an explosion that lit up half the Earth's night sky. But unlike their previous suicide attacks, this one included an escape plan. The crew had equipped their ship with salvaged alien escape pods and used the explosion as cover for a high-speed insertion onto one of the surviving enemy vessels. Within hours, they had captured the ship from the inside, killed its crew in close-quarters combat that their Garden World origins had never prepared them for, and flown it back to Earth broadcasting alien surrender codes. The psychological impact of this success resonated far beyond its tactical value. For the first time since the invasion began, humans had proven they could not only survive in space, but actually capture and operate alien technology. More importantly, they had demonstrated that the aliens could be killed just as easily as any other enemy. The captured ship provided Earth's engineers with their first detailed look at cooperative technology, and what they found changed the entire character of the resistance. The aliens' equipment was sophisticated, but it was also standardized, predictable, and designed by species that had never needed to account for the kind of creative destruction that humans considered normal problem-solving. Dr. James Wright, the xenopsychologist who had first identified the cooperative's true nature, made a discovery that would reshape humanity's understanding of their enemy. Analysis of the captured alien ship's computer systems revealed detailed psychological profiles of every species the cooperative had integrated, and the pattern that emerged was both illuminating and terrifying. Every conquered species shared the same characteristics. They had evolved on stable worlds with abundant resources and minimal environmental threats. Their natural selection had favored cooperation, resource sharing, and peaceful conflict resolution because those traits promoted survival in their benign environments. Humanity was the first species the cooperative had encountered that had evolved under constant threat. The difference wasn't just cultural, it was neurological. Human brains were literally wired for the kind of rapid adaptation, creative problem-solving, and controlled aggression that their environment had demanded for millions of years. We're not just fighting a war, Wright explained to the Joint Chiefs of Staff during a briefing held in a reinforced cave system in the Appalachian Mountains. We're fighting an entire galactic civilization that has no framework for understanding what we are. To them, we're not just primitive, we're incomprehensible. This understanding led to a fundamental shift in human strategy. Rather than simply trying to survive until the aliens gave up, Earth's leadership realized they had an opportunity to do something unprecedented. Defeat the galactic cooperative so thoroughly that they would never threaten another world. The plan that emerged from months of careful preparation relied on humanity's greatest advantage, their willingness to take risks that no rational species would consider. If the cooperative controlled hundreds of worlds and thousands of ships, then humanity would have to find a way to turn that size advantage into a weakness. Commander Elena Rodriguez, promoted to lead Earth's new Strategic Innovation Division, proposed what military historians would later call the Chaos Protocol. Instead of trying to match the aliens' conventional military strength, humanity would do what they did best: adapt, improvise, and turn their enemies' assumptions against them. The first phase involved the systematic capture of more alien ships using tactics that ranged from brilliant to completely insane. Human teams began boarding enemy vessels during combat, using the aliens' own humanitarian protocols against them. When cooperative ships responded to fake distress calls, they found themselves being boarded by humans who fought with a ferocity that their garden world psychology simply couldn't process. Within 6 months, humanity had assembled a fleet of captured alien vessels crewed by volunteers who had learned to operate advanced technology through trial, error, and a casualty rate that would have horrified any civilized species. The fact that 3 out of every 4 boarding attempts ended in complete crew loss was considered an acceptable exchange rate for the strategic advantage gained. The cooperatives' response was to retreat from Earth, orbit, and establish a blockade at the edge of the solar system, hoping to contain the human threat while they developed new protocols for dealing with an apparently insane enemy. This strategic withdrawal was exactly what humanity had been hoping for. Phase 2 of the Chaos Protocol began when the captured alien ships, now operated by human crews who had spent months learning to think like their enemy, approached cooperative positions throughout the galaxy. The ships broadcast proper identification codes and followed standard traffic patterns, appearing to all sensors as legitimate cooperative vessels returning from the Earth integration operation. The humans had learned something vital from studying their enemy. The cooperatives' greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. Their perfect standardized procedures meant that they never questioned ships that followed proper protocols. Their peaceful nature meant they had no experience with the kind of deception that humans considered elementary tactics. Lieutenant Sarah Foster, daughter of the biologist who had first warned about the alien threat, commanded the first deep space raid aboard a captured cooperative cruiser. Her target was a logistics depot that supplied the entire rimward sector of alien space. Her crew consisted of 12 humans, who had learned to operate alien technology and were prepared to take risks that no sane being would consider. The depot's defenses were designed to stop external attacks from hostile fleets, not to prevent a single ship from approaching peacefully and then destroying the facility from within. Foster's crew docked normally, followed standard procedures for a routine supply stop, and then systematically sabotaged every critical system in the complex before escaping in the confusion. The destruction of a major supply depot might have been dismissed as an isolated incident, but it was followed by similar attacks across a dozen star systems. Cooperative installations that had operated peacefully for centuries suddenly found themselves targets of an enemy that struck without warning and disappeared. Before defenses could respond, the reports reaching cooperative high command painted a picture of an enemy that fought with tactics no civilized species could comprehend. The humans didn't just destroy military targets, they attacked infrastructure, supply lines, and even civilian installations, with a thoroughness that suggested they were trying to cripple the cooperative's entire civilization. What the aliens didn't understand was that humans were indeed trying to destroy their civilization, but not out of cruelty. They had realized that the cooperative's peaceful facade concealed a galactic tyranny that had erased the cultural identity of hundreds of species. The only way to free those enslaved worlds was to shatter the system that controlled them. As the first human raids penetrated deeper into cooperative space, they began making a discovery that would change the course of the war. On world after world, they found evidence that not every species had been as thoroughly integrated as the cooperative claimed. Hidden beneath layers of social conditioning and neurochemical modification were the remnants of cultures that remembered what they had lost. 3 years after first contact, the Galactic Cooperative faced a crisis that threatened the very foundation of their civilization. What had begun as a routine integration of a primitive species had evolved into a galaxy-wide revolution that was spreading faster than their forces could contain it. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the CNS Defiance, formerly the cooperative ship Eternal Harmony, and watched as another alien world burned in the distance. But these weren't the fires of destruction. They were the fires of liberation, as another enslaved species threw off centuries of forced pacification and reclaimed their warrior heritage. The human fleet had grown from a handful of captured ships to a force that numbered in the hundreds, crewed by volunteers from dozens of species that had remembered what freedom meant. The Zephyrians had been among the first to join, their suppressed warrior instincts reigniting like a flame that had been banked but never extinguished. Admiral Sarah Kim, now commanding the Earth Liberation Fleet from the captured cooperative dreadnought Retribution, reviewed the latest intelligence reports with satisfaction. The humans had done more than survive. The alien invasion, they had turned it into the catalyst for the largest liberation movement in galactic history. Status report she requested from her mixed crew of humans and former cooperative citizens who had chosen freedom over Security Commander Torvan, the former cooperative officer who had defected after witnessing human tactics firsthand, provided the update. 16 more systems have declared independence in the last month. The stellar nomads have reclaimed their ancestral trade routes and are actively disrupting cooperative supply lines. The Cathani have re-established their clan structure and are demanding the return of their cultural artifacts. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. Species that had been model cooperative citizens for generations were rediscovering aspects of themselves they hadn't known they had lost. The careful neurochemical modifications that had maintained their docility were breaking down under the stress of exposure to human examples of independence and self-determination. Dr. Amanda Foster, now serving as the fleet's chief xenobiologist, had made the breakthrough discovery that explained why human contact was so catalytic. The integration process never actually eliminated the genetic and neurological basis for independence, she explained during a briefing aboard the Defiance. It just suppressed it chemically and socially. Exposure to humans who express those traits freely is triggering a cascade effect that's reversing decades or even centuries of conditioning. The cooperative's response had been as predictable as it was ineffective. Faced with a revolution they couldn't understand, they had defaulted to the only solution their peaceful nature could conceive: more forceful integration. Entire star systems were being subjected to enhanced pacification protocols designed to eliminate even the possibility of independent thought. The result was exactly what humanity had hoped for. Every world that was subjected to increased oppression became a recruiting ground for the liberation movement. Every species that saw their neighbors being forcibly corrected began questioning their own contentment with cooperative rule. The Battle of Kepler Station marked the beginning of the end for the Galactic Cooperative as a unified force. The massive space station served as the administrative heart of the Cooperative's integration program, housing the archives that contained the cultural memories of hundreds of conquered species and the genetic modification facilities that maintained their control. The human assault on the station exemplified everything that made them terrifying to their enemies. Rather than attempting a conventional fleet engagement against the station's massive defenses, they did something no civilized species would consider. They turned civilian ships into weapons. Hundreds of volunteer crews piloted everything from captured merchant vessels to retrofitted mining ships in a coordinated kamikaze attack that overwhelmed the station's defenses through sheer numbers and unpredictability. The station's defensive systems were designed to stop military threats, not to deal with an enemy that was willing to sacrifice entire ships to achieve tactical objectives. But the real objective wasn't the destruction of the station itself. As the massive installation's defenses focused on the suicidal fleet attack, small teams of human commandos infiltrated the facility using maintenance tunnels, service corridors, and the kind of unconventional entry methods that security systems designed by peaceful species had never anticipated. The commandos' mission was to liberate the cultural archives and broadcast them across the galaxy, returning to the suppressed species the knowledge of what they had been before integration. The psychological impact was devastating to cooperative control. On world after world, citizens who had lived their entire lives in contented compliance suddenly remembered songs their grandparents had sung, stories their cultures had told, and dreams their species had pursued before the cooperative had taught them that such things were primitive and harmful. The Cathani were among the first to fully throw off cooperative control, their clan-based society reasserting itself within weeks of the archive broadcasts. The revelation that they had once been explorers and inventors, rather than docile agricultural workers, ignited a passion for reclaiming their heritage that no amount of chemical suppression could contain. The Zephyrians' transformation was even more dramatic. The discovery that their ritualized agricultural competitions were pale echoes of the honor duels that had once defined their culture led to a complete rejection of their assigned role as food producers. Within months, they had reformed their warrior societies and were actively hunting down the cooperative forces that had suppressed them. High Counselor Zethmar, watching his perfect galactic civilization collapse around him, finally understood what the humans had been trying to tell them from the beginning. The cooperative hadn't created peace. They had created a galaxy-wide prison where the inmates had been convinced that their cells were paradise. The humans had done more than resist integration. They had proven that the cooperative's fundamental assumption about the benefits of their system was wrong. Species could be strong and independent without being destructive. Diversity of thought could coexist with cooperation. Competition could drive innovation without leading to war. In the final battle above Cooperative Prime, the capital world of the galactic government, Admiral Kim found herself commanding a fleet composed of ships from dozens of species that had been written off as successfully integrated. The stellar nomads provided reconnaissance and logistics support. The Cathani contributed their natural engineering genius to develop new weapon systems. The Zephyrians served as assault troops whose rediscovered warrior culture made them formidable boarding specialists. The battle itself was almost anticlimactic. The cooperative's forces, composed primarily of species whose aggressive instincts had been systematically suppressed for generations, simply couldn't match the ferocity and creativity of enemies who had remembered what it meant to fight for something they believed in. The surrender came not as a formal document, but as a cascade of defections that left the cooperative leadership isolated and powerless. One by one, their member species chose freedom over security, independence over integration, and the uncertain challenges of self-determination over the guaranteed comfort of submission. In the aftermath of the cooperative's collapse, the galaxy faced a question that hadn't been relevant for 1,000 years. What would galactic civilization look like when it was built on voluntary cooperation rather than enforced compliance? The answer came from an unexpected source. Humanity, the species that had sparked the revolution by refusing to be civilized, became the advocates for a new kind of galactic community. One based not on uniformity, but on the idea that differences could be strengths rather than problems to be solved. The Terran Accords, signed aboard the CNS Defiance in orbit above Earth, established the first truly voluntary interstellar alliance in galactic history. Species could join or leave as they chose. Cultural differences were celebrated rather than suppressed. And for the first time in a millennium, the galaxy was free to discover what its children might become when they were allowed to grow up to be themselves. The humans had kept their promise. They had shown the galaxy that there was an alternative to the cooperative's vision of peace through submission. It was messier, louder, and far more dangerous than the sterile perfection of forced harmony. It was also worth fighting for.